Hello, I'm Lesley Atherton, and this short story is called The Car Crash of Her Wasted Life. I'm doing the done thing, hun. I'm going to hand myself in. Carly grimaced at her friend. She hated being called sweetheart or duck or darling or hun. She especially hated hun, and wondered if that was why Donna used it so often. Hun equals Attila, equals hunk, equals hunger, equals hunting. Hun equals nails squealing up a blackboard. So Donna was going to hand herself in. If what she said was true, then it was about time. And she needn't think she was so bloody wonderful for doing it either. Any decent person would have driven to the police station and confessed weeks ago. In fact, a decent person wouldn't be involved in a hit and run in the first place. They'd have stayed at the scene, admitted liability, and done anything they could to help. But no, Donna considered herself a saint just because she'd been thinking about handing herself in, a few weeks after the event. Thinking about it. Feeble. Going on and on about what she'd do and how she'd do it wasn't the same as actually doing it. Carly knew it wasn't going to happen. OK, yes, Donna had sounded firm and sure. She'd finally made a decision. Now the brat, Donna's description, not Carly's, was out of danger. She would bob over to the cop shop and tell them it was her who bumped into him. But she'd say she didn't realise at the time because she was listening to the radio loudly and was in a hurry. She'd say she had no idea what had happened. Till weeks later, when she had a moment of clarity, she'd kind of present it as a, I wonder if it might have been me. Oh gosh, I do hope not, but I couldn't live for myself till I told you. She was convinced they'd be grateful for her honesty. They'd let her off. She'd smile sweetly and they'd know she was telling the truth. They'll believe me, no shit, she told Carly. After all, what kind of person would knock down a little kid on his tricycle? What kind of person wouldn't even stop to pick him up or help him out? What kind of person wouldn't phone the ambulance when witnessing a preschooler and a catastrophic head injury? And it was even worse because Donna was a mum too. Of course they'd believe her. Bloody hell. Carly hadn't thought of Donna's children. If the police thought Donna was responsible for hurting and not helping one child, they'd possibly pass their concerns on to social services who would investigate her parenting skills. Not stopping and not reporting an accident and not helping? For God's sake, not even helping. Surely must be signs of someone who just hasn't got it in them to be a good parent. Carly hated Donna. She knew that now. They'd been friends since junior school, but weren't any longer. The realisation had been forcing itself into her consciousness for some time, but as soon as Donna told her about the hit and run, Carly had known it for sure. Her oldest friend was no longer a friend. The car crash that was Donna's life had become a car crash for real. Things became even worse between them half an hour later when Donna had confessed, oh my God, how could she have done this? That she'd been drinking at the time of the accident. Drinking white wine. Not drinking a glass with a meal. Drinking a bottle with a handful of olives. Terribly sophisticated, Donna had thought. Anyone with half a brain knew that driving after a bottle of wine, drunk on an empty stomach, was never sophisticated. And all this crap about Donna going to the police. Carly now saw it for what it truly was. Bravado and lies, told by a weak-minded and lazy young woman, in order to negate responsibility. And Carly was sick of it. She was sick and tired of hearing all about Donna's little victories. All the things she did and got away with. Traffic violations, pulling her kids out of school for completely manufactured reasons, or keeping them off for a week with a virus, when really they were all spending a week in bed with Pop-Tarts and Coca-Cola. Sure, Carly knew that Donna's kids got plenty of cuddles from their mum, but cuddles alone didn't make her an adequate parent. When are you going to the police now? Asked Carly. Want me to look after the kids? Carly didn't relish the idea of caring for the tearaways, but it wasn't the kids' fault that their mum was the person she was. Donna shook her head and looked arrogantly over towards her former friend, saying nothing. Carly was sitting stiff and upright on Donna's small sofa, on the seat nearest the front door, preparing herself for a quick exit. Donna was sprawled on her large sofa, enormous belly and breasts spilling out of her clothing, top and bottom. She had egg yolk and ketchup stains on her low-cut T-shirt. "You'll need to tidy yourself up and sober yourself up before you go," Carly said. "They'll think you're an unfit parent if you go in like that." Donna moved her head a couple of inches, that was hyperactive for Donna, and settled her eyes on Carly's face, petulantly. "Not going today," she said, farting loudly and cracking open another can of Carling. "Can't be arsed." Furious, Carly just couldn't let her get away with it. She idly flicked through the newspaper, if you could call it that, on the edge of Donna's sofa. She wasn't interested in the articles or the news. She was looking at it to avoid having to look at Donna. Why did Donna buy this junk? Article after tabloid article. The subject so fatuous she couldn't quite believe it herself. Semi-famous people jumping from a yacht into clear blue sea. The fading looks of an old pop star. A middle-aged woman sexually assaulting a youth on a plane. Good God, does it get worse? No wonder Donna had become this unmotivated, morality-free zone if she read this garbage every day. Later, when she'd left and was on her way into town, Carly longed for the peace of the Magnolia Haven she would shortly be moving to, and puzzled once again about how she could deal with the whole car crash situation. Well, she knew one thing. In a fair world, where punishments compensated for the crime, Donna should be doing time. Of course, Carly didn't know the names of all the charges that could be brought against her, but she knew that there must be plenty. Thinking of the alcohol and the dangerous driving, and the fact that Donna was talking on her mobile phone when this had happened, and that she was attempting to balance a mug of something hot on her lap, probably coffee, as an attempt to sober up on the schoolroom. What an idiot she was in so many ways. And Carly knew that the victim, the child hurt, was loved and cared for and hadn't been dragged up as Donna's kids were. But Carly also knew, because she listened to the local gossip, that his recovery was going to be slow because of the massive organ damage he'd sustained. He was lucky to be alive, yet all Donna was bothered about was the potential manslaughter charge. Selfish cow. Carly kept thinking about her former friend, strengthened by each angry thought. Donna was an asset to nobody. Her kids didn't even provide her with motivation. She was directionless and faithless. Faithless. Suddenly, Carly considered one option for retribution, an eye for an eye. A child's suffering in replacement for another child's suffering. A mum's tears to dry another mum's tears. It was an idea, but when she'd looked down at Donna's 3 kids all lying on the floor in front of the telly earlier that day, she knew she couldn't inflict pain on those poor innocents. They had enough to contend with by just having useless Donna as a mum. No, Carly must consider something else. Perhaps Carly should just keep encouraging Donna to confess. No, she had come to realise that Donna was not going to confess, no matter what she claimed she was just about to do tomorrow. She hadn't confessed to any of her other misdemeanours, like when she took £20 from a market trader's pouch, or when she lost a neighbour's dog because she left the back gate open. That time she'd quickly closed the gate and pretended the little Yorkie had managed to scale a 6-foot fence. So, what was she to do about Donna? Earlier, she'd almost decided to ring the police station and report her anonymously. But when Carly had called over the eldest of Donna's 3 children, who had all been brawling on the floor watching cartoons, he had grinned at her with the face of an angel and said, "I'm going to make a world full of wonderfulness when I grow up." There was hope for him. And when she saw that smile, she knew that she loved the kids, even if the relationship she had with their mum was strained. She just couldn't do it. It seemed that Carly had only 2 choices. She either had to accept Donna as she was and keep her knowledge secret, or she had to walk away and keep her knowledge secret. She couldn't do the former. That much was quite obvious. But could she do the latter, could she? Yes, she could, and she would. Carly lived on the other side of town, but was moving to a new flat in a new district the following day. She hadn't told Donna. Normally they'd have told each other everything, but since the car crash, Donna's car crash of a life had affected Carly more than she'd realised. The friend who was no longer a friend was also no longer a confidant, and that meant that Carly had her escape route. Before she'd walked away from Donna and down the street to the first intersection, she knew what she would do. Carly had begun writing Donna a letter in her head. Of course she'd make sure she posted it once she'd already moved house. That was the way to do it. No return address. Did it make her a coward? Oh well, so be it. She started the letter in her head. Dear Donna, we haven't been getting along for some time, and I think it is best we don't see each other again. I can't live with what you've done, and I can't understand how you can. Cowardly, but yes, it was a start. It was a start. Carly, as happens to many women on the brink of a momentous life change, then walked to the nearest branch of Boots and bought a new hair colour, spiced mahogany. She wasn't used to going darker, and the prospect of this small but not insignificant life transformation cheered her. After all, you can't force somebody to be worse than they are, just as you can't force someone to be better. You can't force a person to do the right thing, especially if their brains are wired up differently and apathetically. And perhaps when Donna didn't have Carly around to act as judge and jury, there was just a chance, the smallest of chances, that she might start making her own good decisions in the future, instead of always rebelling against Carly's overly moralistic ones. Carly realised at that moment that Donna's life wasn't a disaster. It wasn't a car crash of a life with chaos spilling out around it. Neither was it quiet and peaceful like Carly's. Donna's life had caused a car crash, though, which nearly caused the death of a little lad. But it was only Donna who could make things better and make things right. She had to take the responsibility for once. She couldn't always rely on Carly being the angel on her shoulders who made all her difficult decisions. Carly sighed and sent Donna one last text. Decided to go away at the last minute, leaving in a bit, turned phone off, be in touch when I get home. Not all lies. She was going away, and she was just about to turn the phone off. Turn it off to Donna anyway. But she felt no guilt. She'd done it. She'd made the decision that had been haunting her for weeks, and there was nothing else that needed to be said. She couldn't report Donna, and felt without any doubt that Donna wouldn't report herself. But she couldn't be with her, talk to her, laugh with her, knowing what she knew. Just a few clicks more, and Donna's number was blocked forever. Carly leaned on the wall outside Boots, took a deep yogic breath and smiled as she thought about spiced mahogany and its matching nail colour and lipstick. Even better, M&S was just across the road. Her new job and new home called for a new set of clothes, as well as new hair and new attitude. Carly wasn't going to be Donna's doormat any longer. So pleased was Carly with her hard-made decisions that she didn't check the road as she crossed and didn't notice the old, battered Astra containing one mum and 3 kids that hurtled towards her on their way to the police station. She didn't notice the pain of impact. She didn't notice either the crumpled, splattered, dark blood red hair dye burning into her legs, nor her ex-best friend shouting, "Carly, Carly, 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 hon, are you all right? Hon, hon, hon," from the driver's seat.